Congratulations, three-time Academy Award nominee Todd Field. So, just out of curiosity, how many people here were seeing this for the first time tonight? Pretty awesome, right? You know, one of the things I really love about this movie is how right off the bat, you kind of announce to the audience that they're in for something unique with the way that you move most of the end credits up front and have the music that we don't have context for yet, and there's text messaging that we don't have context for yet. At what point in the process did you decide you were going to open the movie that way? Was that always the intention, or is that something you came up with in post?
No, it was really the first line of the script. I don't really know, I don't think I consciously knew why I was doing it, but I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. They're probably not worth talking about,
Well, no, that's what we're here for. I mean, what are some of the reasons that go into putting all the credits up front that you're doing that kind of bold move?
Well, there's a few different very practical reasons. The first line of the script was, credits one after the other, like cramped players on a stage, and it's fairly thematically with the film is this idea that it takes a lot of people to sort of supply the power, and all of these people work very, very hard at their jobs, and just like players in an orchestra, and there are many of them, most of them are unsung, and we came out of the pandemic and we're all at home watching movies, and I truly resent watching a film and watching the end credits fly to the right of the screen, and I scramble for a remote trying to see if any of my friends were involved in making it. So there was that. There was also, the very practical consideration of, much is made in the interview with Adam Gopnik about whatever her history is, or whatever her constructed history is, and it was important that one of those things we have a feeling is true, because some of it's hyperbole, some of it's complete bullshit, and some of it's real, and the thing about her spending her 20s postgraduate out of Harvard, going down to the Eastern Amazon and recording, ethnographic field work is true. That she did do that, and that seemed important. And since there's so much spoken about it, and little sort of totems of that come up through the film, it was important to hear that Icaro. So much so to where my sound designer, Stephen Griffiths, we sent his nephew down to the Amazon, and he went out the river for 2 days to record Alicia Vargas Fernandez, and that's the first music you hear in the film. So I could go on, and we need to talk about other things, but that's essentially what it was.
Well, you mentioning sound design, brings up the fact that one of the things I love about your movies, I feel like you were one of those directors who pays as much attention to sound as image. Like I'm thinking about things like Little Children, which I don't want to spoil anything because people might be coming back to watch that tonight. But the sequence in Little Children, there's a sequence at the pool where a lot of the tension comes from the sound mix and the way you kind of bring in and out the different crowd noise, and the sense of menace kind of is very much played through the sound. And I'm curious for you what your kind of overall, I guess for lack of a better word, philosophy is about how to use sound design in movies.
I like an amateur, I know. I mean, I know some incredible practitioners of that art. And I was very lucky as a young person when I was a fellow at the American Film Institute to have people in this industry open their doors and do me favors and never make it feel like they were doing me favors. One of whom was John Resch. I don't know if any of you guys know John Resch, but John Resch is one of the great Foley artists of all time. He went to AFI. He worked at Warner's for many years now. He's up with George Lucas up in Northern California. But John had worked on my thesis film, and he worked on all my other films. Well, on this film, we were in a bubble, and we were up in the middle of Scotland in like a, you know, in a 15th century nunnery, Monica Willie and I, and our team, and so we had a lot of time, you know, and so I would, you know, John, one of the things that he made me do in film school, which he said, I'll help you out, but you need to learn how to do this. So he would he'd bring me into the Foley pits, he would make me shoot sound. And it was such an incredible satisfaction in having an attachment to every sound that's in your film, and I never really wanted to give that up. So I kept working the same way, and on this, Mona and I shot most of the sound in Scotland, a great deal of the sound, and we would send it back to Stephen and back and forth, and but you know, obviously, you know, for all kinds of reasons, mainly that this main character is attenuated, highly attenuated to sound. She has misophonia and kinophonia, which is why she's bothered by motions and repetitive things, you know. So it was a lot of intent behind every single sound in the film. There's no room tone. We're not pushing air through the speakers or anything. Every single thing, and also Roland Winky, our production sound designer, as Deb Adair, our re-recording mixer, would tell you, just did the most exquisite job in terms of production sound, with deca trees and, you know, 60 microphones everywhere, and it's a very, very complex mix.
Well, yeah, I mean, that intention behind every sound you're mentioning, that's something that's very clear, and it's another thing I like about you as a director is I feel like all of your compositions and the way you cut together your scenes, it's all very precise, and there's always a reason behind it. Like, you don't really do the thing that a lot of directors do, where you kind of conventionally cover a scene. I mean, there are a lot of scenes in this movie, like I'm thinking about the scene where she sort of gives Sebastian's walking papers, and you don't really cut. It's just kind of all from this one angle. And I'm curious with scenes like that, or scene where the board is talking to her about her becoming toxic, where you don't cut to kind of conventional coverage. Is that the part of the game plan and the intention from the beginning, or do you shoot the coverage and then decide not to use it in editing?
No, I don't really shoot much coverage. I like to rehearse a lot, and most of that rehearsal, with actors of this caliber, that rehearsal is really about talking. You know, you talk a lot, and then I typically start the day, unless it's something very involved, like the Juilliard scene where we went in and Cate and I rehearsed for a couple of days together, full rehearse. You know, and mostly we start the first part of the day. The crew's just having coffee for an hour and a half, you know, and you're working it out, and then you say, okay, all right, how does it, you know, where should the camera be? For instance, that scene, the Sebastian scene, that's Alan Corduner. He's one of my favorite actors. He worked with Mike Lee in Topsy Turvy. You may have remembered him from that with Jim Broadbent. Great stage actor, for one, dear friend. And you know, you watch that scene and you keep thinking, okay, what should I do? You know, should I cover it? Should I see his eyes? Should I see how nervous he is? But really, it's a fairly, you know, we have basically 4 points of view in the film. You know, most of them are objective, you know, loosely speaking, whatever that means. But mainly, where would it be the most uncomfortable place to watch that scene? And that would be if you were standing on the other end of that room going, oh shit, don't do it, don't do that, right? And so it was clear after watching them rehearse, like, okay, that's where the camera has to be. So there's a little move at the beginning, but mostly it's just observed. It's a fact, that's it. Yeah.
So you're not, this sounds to me, if I'm correct, you're not the kind of director who necessarily is storyboarding or planning these shots ahead of time. It's something that more you're sort of responding to what the actors are doing on the day and working it out that way, or? Well,
it depends. I mean, of course you have to storyboard things, you know. I think Ray Harvey, are you out here somewhere, Ray? Ah, there he is. Ray Harvey, one of the greatest storyboard artists, living storyboard artists, one of the great talents. And Ray has worked with everybody. He's never available. It's really annoying. But, Ray and I went to the American Film Institute together, and Ray was my production designer on all my films. I offered him to do my first film, and he turned me down. So, but we're old friends, and so I was very lucky. Certain things had to be worked out before I even went to Berlin. A couple of sequences, and Ray and I worked those out together. There was one other sequence. There are two other sequences because we only had the orchestra for a very limited period of time. Typically, a professional orchestra like this, they rehearse for about 2.5 hours, they have a break, and then maybe another 2.5 hours, and that's it. And they're very, very strict about it. And when we told them, no, we need 10-hour days, they went, why? We already know how to play it. We don't need to rehearse anymore. Like, no, we're not really rehearsing. This is the movie, you know. But we had such a limited amount of time with them, and sort of the aesthetic that was important. The things that I've been looking at a lot were, and you know, it's a process movie. It's a rehearsal movie. It's not a performance film. And when you look at rehearsals of conductors and orchestras, typically, unless it's von Karajan, who was a master of staging his own mythology, but most of them, you have a single or maybe two cameras if you're lucky. Maybe there's a boom up on stage with the orchestra, one back in the rear of the house, and that's what you're watching. If you watch it at all, there's not a lot of material available of watching conductors rehearse. It's like secret stuff. But the footage that there is absolutely intoxicating. Like it is to watch anybody make something. Like, I don't know, did you see this Beatles documentary that Peter Jackson did recently? Yeah. I mean, it's like, I could watch it for 100,000 hours. It's just so great, just watching how people kind of, how they get there. And so it was really important that we not make it cinematic, you know. It needed to feel like if we had a documentary crew. But easier said than done, because we had very, very few days, and we had to accomplish things, and the camera had to be in certain places at certain times. So, like the very first day, we had to do 95 camera setups. I've never done 95 camera setups in my life, and that took a tremendous amount of planning, and obviously storyboards that Ray wasn't available for. But
well, what about something like that scene where Lydia is driving recklessly? Like, that's such a great nerve-jangling scene. And I was watching it, and I was trying to figure out, you know, like how much control you actually had, because it looks very, it's very convincing. That you know.
Oh, it is convincing. It's real. It's absolutely real. I mean, Cate told me at the very beginning, you know, she said, you know, I like to drive really fast. I said, yeah, okay. She said, and I'm really good. And I said, okay, all right, okay. So I took her out on this racetrack out in Bavaria, like an hour and a half outside of Berlin. And what I did was we created, that intersection is the most famous intersection in Berlin. That's Alexanderplatz, right? There's 6 roads that feed that roundabout. And very, very dangerous, because even if you walk it down, anyone who spent time in Berlin will tell you that cyclists they rule. And if you get too close to them or you tell them to stop, they'll hit you with a chain. So to do a lockup with your ADs is nearly impossible. It's horrifying, you know. So we only had 2 hours to shoot that. And to prepare for that, we had 25 stunt drivers. Like what you see out the window past Nina Haas is a couple of cars, but truthfully, Cate's weaving in and out of many, many, many cars. So we had to go out into a racetrack on our day off and practice that for hours and hours and hours. And then it's a single take. I mean, but we just got it, barely before they opened the road back up.
Now you mentioned the Juilliard scene, and I guess the highest compliment I can pay you is the first time I saw the movie, I didn't even notice that it was an unbroken 10-minute or whatever it is take. I didn't notice it until after I saw the movie and started reading about it. And I'm curious, like, in terms of just how you conceptualize and execute something like that, first of all, what do you feel shooting a scene in that way, what does it give the actors and what does it give the audience? Why did you choose to approach it that way?
Well, it's a real puzzle. It was the first scene I wrote, and I've been asking myself, what's important in the scene? Like, and for me, there's a few things going on there that may not be apparent at first glance, in terms of what's happening with this character, because the movie's ahead of us a little bit, and she has writer's block. She's trying to compose exactly what it is that she's criticizing by another female composer who is younger and by her own account is hot, right? So everybody has their reasons, I mean, yes, she's making some points that maybe some people would agree with, but why is she making those points, and in what manner is she making those points? So she's going through a lot of different colors there, and Florian and I talked about this, like, okay, we're gonna have like 35, 36 camera setups, And we've been talking about that, because I had a location very early on, this is before Cate ever arrived, and it just kept bothering me. And finally we were out scouting, and I said, we have to do it in one. We need to do those 36 setups, so it has to be in one, because she has to drive the editorial. And she can drive the editorial, and it will be so much better if we stay out of her way. But we have to do it in a manner that we don't get caught. You should, hopefully, if you're involved with the scene enough, at the end you might think, wait, did they cut the camera or not? But not know for certain. It's not like, I admire these big bravuro wonders, but that wasn't the point. The point was to let the character have control over the tempo, over time, because she's going to lose control of time later, right? So, okay, well, that was really easier said than done, which is we couldn't get a crane in there. We couldn't bring wires in there. You can't do that with a Steadicam. So we basically had to build our own equipment to be able to do that. And then we had to bring in 4 grips, not to mention the sound team and the camera crew on a remote head, and we had to rehearse it. It was a very, very careful dance. It took us 2 days to get it. We had it on the first take, and then at the very last moment, right when Cate walks down the stairs, somebody slipped. And then we chased it for 2 days. It was really mainly just so the character had a tremendous amount of agency, and also that she was in control, seemingly in control, even though she's very much not in control.
Well, what you're saying there kind of speaks to, obviously, one of the great strengths of the movie, which is Cate Blanchett's performance is incredible, and the movie's focused on this incredible character. How did her performance, and once you realized what you had in her and what she could give you, how did that inform the way you shot the movie? I mean, did your decisions, did decisions in other scenes in terms of camera movement, blocking, cutting, were they dictated kind of by what you were getting from her?
There was probably a half a dozen shots that I knew for a fact, like at the script stage, like, okay, I know I'm going to go in 65-foot techno. I know that I'm going to do this little swivel move and we're going to come back. And I knew there were certain things that were locked. They were just facts, for better or for worse. But mostly the rules were take away her safety net and how high, just keep pushing her as high as possible and give her nothing, like nowhere, no safety at all, I didn't tell her that. It was about 3 weeks into the shooting, and she said, "You don't do any coverage, do you?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you sure you don't want to do a close-up here?" I said, "No close-ups, no." But mostly it was driven by her, or by Noémie Merlant and her, or by Nina Haas and her, or by Sophie Kauer and her, or by Julian, or and again, it was just like starting the day and working through the scene, and then saying, okay, what does this scene feel like, and where does the camera want to be, as opposed to, let's do 6 setups. Do 6 setups, yeah, the scene will work, but I'm trying to protect myself from myself, have an opinion about a point of view at origin as opposed to in post,
Yeah, well, I think that it gives the movie a confidence that you kind of subconsciously feel as an audience. And so another thing I really like about this movie is I felt like within 10 or 15 minutes, I just sat back in my chair and relaxed, because I was like, okay, I'm in good hands. Like, this guy knows what he's doing, he knows what he's trying to do. And I find it interesting, that idea you were saying about the movie getting ahead of the audience a little bit, because that's another thing I love about it, is that it does get ahead of you, and it's why it rewards repeat viewings. But is that something that was challenging in the editing process, figuring out how far ahead to let the movie get?
Yeah, most certainly. And I was in a very good place, which is I had one of the greatest editors on the planet, Monica Wille, with me. Monica is a very, very disciplined collaborator and great filmmaker in her own right. So it was really always about that, like how far to be ahead, exactly what you're saying, and what do we really need to know, and are we more engaged with knowing more here and knowing less? And those are, that's the vernacular of film that everybody asks in post. But yeah, just trying to find a balance in terms of, are we pointing too much?
Well, and when it's the two of you in this nunnery or whatever, editing this thing, how do you sort of retain your objectivity about how the audience is going to react to this movie? You know what I mean?
It's a good question. again, like Mona's from Vienna and I'm from here, so we drive on the right side of the road. So we had no car, and so we had the North Sea, we had sheep being born, and we had some birds, and it was like, those are the only concerns in terms of going outside and shooting sound. But Mona would run 5 miles every morning, and I'd walk 4.5 miles every morning. Then we'd come back and sit and have coffee and say, okay, let's go through the work. And then inevitably we'd run the film down, and at the end of it we would say, how did you feel about her today? And those answers would change a lot. And then we'd say, well, okay, why? And it was really about trying to figure out what is, if you put it in architectural terms, the building is going to, don't get caught leaning one way or the other. Trying to find a place where, at a certain point, you say, okay, I'm feeling differently today, not because we've changed the cut, I'm feeling differently today because I had a bad night, or I'm feeling differently today because it's raining outside and I was thinking of going for a run. Trying to figure out why you were engaging with the film in a different manner as opposed to it being an editorial thing. So just to be certain that there was access points for anyone, that anyone could bring anything that they wanted to complete the film for themselves, as opposed to us. Right?
I think we've got time for a few audience questions, and there's one right here. I'll repeat the questions so that people in the back can hear.
So the very last line of the film is "Let no one judge you," and and after you not judge the character, the writer not judge the character they're writing. But I'm curious whether you were tracking how we, the audience, our relationship to Lydia is throughout the film, moment to moment. I'm seeing it for the third time, and every time I feel differently about her moment to moment. Judge is too strong a word, obviously.
So the question is about whether or not Todd was tracking how the audience would feel about Lydia, whether they would be judging her and how much during the movie.
Well, I think you probably just answered your own question, which is that, like you say, you've seen it 3 times and you feel differently about her every time, right? I mean, so that's kind of that getting back to what I was just talking about with Monica. That was sort of the idea, right? Which is that it's impossible not to judge each other, right? It's impossible not to have bias. It's like the world is a noisy place, and we only have so many hours in the day. It's like a practical thing. We all judge each other, But if you spend a few hours with someone, what would you walk away with, right? And but like you, I feel the same way. I mean, I feel very differently every time I've watched it.
Yes. Back there. Yeah.
Hi. I've seen the movie 4 times now, just like him, and every time I see it, there's different laughs. So the audience laughs at different points, and I laugh at different points. And I was wondering how laughter and comedy kind of played into the writing process, and if you were going for laughs or when.
The question was about the role of humor in the writing process.
Well, my wife always says that I crack myself up. She says I laugh at my own jokes, But yeah, I mean, I think there's humor in the film.
Well, it's interesting because, again, this was my 3rd time seeing the movie, and every audience, it's sort of like each audience has its own personality in terms of, like, this audience seemed to think it was the funniest of the 3 times.
Yeah, it's different. I've experienced the same thing. I've been in audiences and heard laughs I've never heard in a different audience before. Like, I wasn't here with you guys. I didn't hear, what the response was like. But, like, say the difference between being at Venice or being in New York was just like night and day. Like, totally different kind of reaction to the film.
All the way up in the back.
There's a lot of issues that you raise in your feature that are very much of this day and age. Considering your extensive sabbatical, what was the initial driving force with all of these culminating factors that made you want to make this picture and tell it through the lens of a conductor?
Well, I kind of, I guess, live by the maxim, festina lente, or make haste slowly. I've been thinking about this character for a long time, for many years, and most of the time, I've been lucky enough to write a script and be paid for it. It's always based on underlying material or intellectual property, and it's sprung from another writer. And oftentimes I end up working with those writers, and I always feel a sense of envy because inevitably they created their characters, right? And I'm the cleanup man. So I've been thinking of her for a very, very long time. For all I knew, she was going to live out her days in a pocket notebook, and then at the very beginning of the pandemic, in March 2020, Peter Kujawski and Kiski Higgs at Focus, vaguely speaking, had this idea that they wanted to do a movie about classical music with a conductor. Oh, okay. All right, yeah. Okay, well, I have this idea, but I can't tell you what it is. And they said, okay. And they said, just write whatever you want. And no one had ever said that to me before. I remember going back to when Ray and I were at AFI. I had a teacher there, Stuart Rosenberg, wonderful director. He directed Cool Hand Luke, amongst other films. And we had him for a year. And he said to us, as people do, he said, all of you are complaining, because we were all in our 20s, and you're all complaining. And he said, but this is going to be the happiest you are, the freest you are, you can write anything you want. And of course he was right. So that was the first time I've been able to write anything that I wanted to do, because I have a large family and I don't have a large bank account. So to be able to take this character and put her in there was a perfect situation, because I wanted to be able to examine power. How does power work? Doesn't matter who holds the ring. Inevitably, they become Gollum. And why do people fight for it? How do people benefit from it? How does their partner benefit from it? How do the people that work from her benefit it? How do they ignore her behavior because it suits them, and they get, they benefit from it. Period. So to have a structure that's so clear and a frame, which is in an orchestra, it's a triangle. I mean, she's sitting at the top of it or standing at the top of it, and the lines of power are drawn very clearly. So it's just a very, very simple way to look at it. And then as I got further into it, especially when I started talking to John Mauceri, I don't know if any of you guys know John Mauceri. Do you know John? Anybody? John was one of Bernstein's assistant for like 15 years. And John's written several books, which I highly recommend. A really incredible writer, and educator and advocate for concert music, and had conducted the Hollywood Bowl for many years for the LA Phil. So he'd been around films, so I could ask him all kinds of questions. And the deeper I got into it, because I'm a jazz guy, I had no idea what this milieu was like, and I realized the levels of power in within a large orchestra, and the rules and mores are very different, very much like academia. Like, the arts inform our culture, but they're outside of our culture. Just like the university system they have their own rules and their own sort of ways of functioning. They're outside of life, but they inform life. So just like, what is the arcana of that? Where does that come from? And mostly it comes from white patriarchal power, and that's sort of like the gold standard, because and that's what this character is striving for. She says that very clearly in the beginning. She kind of poo-poos all these contemporaries of hers, which is absurd, because if you look at the state of classical music right now, we still haven't had one female conductor at one of the big 5 orchestras in America, and there's never been a chief conductor of any major German orchestra ever. So, when I was preparing this, we worked with the Dresden Philharmonic, a wonderful, wonderful group of players, and I wanted to cast the supporting roles as orchestra members if possible. And I thought maybe a couple people might be willing to do it. Well, 40 people from the orchestra, nearly half, wanted to do it. So I spent 2 days interviewing people. And all of the female players, I would ask them, the first thing I would say, do you think it was different for you than your male counterparts? And they would just laugh in my face. Of course it was different. And I had a violist tell me, I'll tell you, I'll just give you one example, she said. And she was maybe 35, 40 years old. She said, my last job was with Munich. I was the first female violist in their 450-year history. That's today. So, in that way, this is very much a fairy tale.
You mentioned that focus sort of said, go write what you want, and how liberating that was. But is there also do you have any, I guess, like neurotic crises of confidence when you're writing an original with that kind of freedom? Because, if you're adapting in the bedroom or little children, you always have your kind of initial reaction to the book to go on. Like, that those are great stories. Is there any way harder writing an original with that kind of freedom?
I don't know. I'm about to find out because I'm starting another original script now, and I'm kind of feeling. I'm kind of asking myself that question. But no, in this case, it was very, very easy. Like I said, I really envied all my fiction friends. Like, I envied John Franzen, I envied Tom Perrotta, I envied Andre Debussy III, I envied all these people that I worked with who could sit down and world build. It's just an incredible feeling to be able to do that. But also, again, it was the beginning of the lockdown, and it seemed kind of like short beer. Like, here I was, like, somebody's crazy enough to write me a check to write something. I didn't even think there was going to be movie theaters on the other side, we were all wearing hazmat stuff. You guys remember what it was like. You had to go out and try to send one family member out and buy 3.5 weeks worth of groceries so you wouldn't have to expose yourself. And the idea that I was sitting there writing a film, I was like, okay, who cares if anybody ever reads this? So I felt like and it was a great place to escape to. I never thought that Focus would ever make it. I told them when I handed it in, I said, you're not going to like it, and you're not going to want to make it, and just so you know, that's okay, I'll write something else for you. And then they said they wanted to make it. I thought, they're nuts.
Yeah, now I feel like, writing a new original, you're kind of under all this pressure of expectation, because this movie has been so amazingly received. I don't know, like, when I was researching it for tonight, I realized that it won the top prize at the New York Film Critics, the National Film Society of Film Critics, the LA Film Critics, which puts it in pretty rarefied, company, with like Schindler's List and LA Confidential, a couple others basically. So, in a way, now you've got all eyes on you, Todd. So the next one has to be a masterpiece.
It's a PSA. A very worthy cause.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two more. Yeah.
Could you talk about how you got the idea for the accordion scene?
How you got the idea for the accordion scene?
Well, I found this little house. I couldn't scout. So I was on Google Map flying around Staten Island, and I found this little house next to what would have been Fresh Kills, the largest. It's all been reclaimed. It's a beautiful place now, but at one time it was the largest landfill on planet Earth. And I thought, okay, that's where she would have grown up. You want to get away from that pretty badly, But that area was settled by a lot of immigrants from Eastern European immigrants, and many of them play the accordion. And I thought she should have some entry point into music that perhaps is not too related to concert music. So if you look carefully when she goes back to her childhood room, you see like a picture of Cate playing an accordion as a child. I shouldn't tell these stories anyway. Dangerous anecdotes. I'll tell you. So, there's this. Obviously, it's a turning point with her. She's lost everything. The neighbors come over and ask her, turn the music down, literally. And so I was trying to figure out what this bridge would be. And I did 100 different things that I tried to figure out what's that bridge going to be for her. That wasn't one of them. I had mentioned to my first AD and co-producer Sebastian Farbrooks, who was from Berlin, who I've worked with in advertising for 15 years all over the planet. And highly serious, detailed artist. I must have mentioned early on, like, let's get some accordion lessons for Cate, and let's get an accordion. I don't know, just to have it around. I'd totally forgotten about it. And then that day, when we're about to leave, all of a sudden he came up to me and he said, "The accordion teacher is here." And I said, "What?" He said, You asked back in June for an accordion teacher. I said, "It's November." And he said, "Well, she's here." I said, "Okay." So I went to go visit Cate, and I said, "Cate, the accordion teacher's here." And she said, "What?" "I don't know how to play the accordion." I said, "You're kidding. Of course you know how to play." She said, "No, I'm not doing that." And I said, "No, you'll do it. You'll do it." "Well, what am I doing?" I said, "Well, we'll write a little song." And so, we did a little nod to Tom Hanks, and it was like Tom Waits, sorry. Slightly different. And we did one take, and that was it. And of course, that turned out to be exactly what was required. We'd gone to a lot of other links and a lot of other methods, and when Mona and I got to post, we said, "Well, that's it. It's just a single take." So.
All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more, and we've got, back there.
When you were writing the script, did you always know it would be Cate Blanchett as Lydia, or what were you thinking?
Did you guys know it was going to be Cate Blanchett?
Yeah, I always knew it would be Cate. I didn't. I've never written for an actor before. I've said this before because I've answered this question quite a bit, as you might imagine. So bear with me. Normally I find that if I'm writing for an actor, it would be reductive for something I've seen them already do, and probably not good for them, and probably not good for me. So I never think of an actor. But in this case, she just popped up. I met her 10 years before. Joan Didion and I had written a screenplay together, and Joan and I really wanted Cate. So we had a long meeting with her. Ultimately, that project didn't happen because we couldn't get backing for it. But I was so changed by that meeting because, aside from being considerable skills, as a performer, obviously, she has the intellect and the heart and the soul of. She's a tremendous human being to spend time with, and just the way that she looks at material is so holistic, and she looks at it as a filmmaker. So I really wanted to be in dialogue with her. But so when I started the script, she kind of popped up, and she just never left. So I just put it on my desk, and say Cate, and every morning I'd say, "Hi, Cate." She never answered back, And then when I finished the script, I turned it into the studio, and they said, "Do you have anyone in mind?" And I said, "No." Because I was afraid like they'd call her and spook her or something, And I waited like a month, and they were really patient. They said, "We can send you casting lists. We've got an in-house casting department." I said, No, it's good, And then my wife again, she kind of kicked me and said, "Quit being so sheepish, call her." So I did, and she committed very quickly, and we were lucky because we were supposed to go right into production, and then there was a second lockdown in Berlin at the time, so it was good because Cate did 2 other films, and she was able to prepare for a year before we actually started rehearsal, which is really, really important.
Well, we've got to get the theater ready for a couple more movies, so I'll wrap this up. But if you want to see 2 more great movies, come back for Little Children in the Bedroom.